That one's out of battery 2.
Yeah, what's it think?
Who's in charge of batteries?
Are they AA or AAA's? AA's.
How many?
2. Yeah, we just leave them on. We left them on last night just to make sure they were good and warmed up for the day.
Good job.
Well, mine's working.
All right, I'll just have to talk like this.
No. Those aren't the two. Those aren't the two he took out of mine, were they?
That's like put them back in there and roll them on.
Hey, green light. I like it.
We are a go for launch. We're gonna launch Gophers.
Let's go first. That sounds like a fun game. Well, how was your week?
Oh, it's been good so far.
Yeah. Cutting
You know?
Milo?
Well, cutting beans.
Beans, oh.
Yeah, we're about to switch to Milo. They're cutting it out at Quinter. And
Okay.
So, but I haven't been called to battle yet, so,
Oh,
you know.
well.
I get to stay here and cut beans, which are far harder to cut and far less fun.
Okay, well, you're driving a tractor. How can they be harder to cut?
Well, you're driving a combine, and with Milo, you get to cut way up here. With beans, you have to cut right on the ground.
Oh.
And anytime a stick or something gets bunched up on the header, it makes this big old pile, and you got to back up and pick it up and go over it and continue on. And you can go like 2 mile an hour, and it's just me out there with me and my cart and my truck, and so I get to just drive all 3 of them at the same time. Just
Okay.
whenever I
All
get
3 at once?
Well,
Yeah.
sometimes they're all 3 running,
All
but
right.
not driving at all.
Okay. Well, see there, I learned something new about farming, which would be a short list of things I know about farming, but, okay, well, nothing new in the math world. Yeah, nothing new for me at all, so.
Still the same math, hasn't changed yet?
Well, in my room, it stays pretty, evidently hard to understand based by the way the kids are acting, but, all right. Well, let's get into something that's more fun to talk about than math, and that is John chapter 13. So, a quick recap of where we went last week. Jesus did something unexpected to the 12 that were gathered there, and he washed their feet, and it was significant because nobody had done that. They didn't have a way of, a servant that was there to do it for them. Nobody took it upon themselves to do that for one another, and so Jesus saw a need, and he did what love required, and he washed their feet to demonstrate to them that servant attitude that he had. And then what was especially significant about one person's feet that he washed?
They were, just a second here, I'm trying to find the, this was wonderful.
Stumped you.
Well, not stumped, I was trying to read the exact thing. Anyways, there it is. Well, there it is, there, I found it. Verse 18.
Good.
I'm not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but the scripture must be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. So one of the heels that he was washing is being lifted against him.
And the very next place those feet were going were to betray him. So Jesus washed the feet of the one that was going to use those feet to go betray him. And it's, I think you can get several little metaphors out of there straight from the text, but it is significant that Jesus provided the same service to the one that he knew was going to betray him as he provided to those that he knew were going to love him to the end. And so I think there's a tremendous lesson in there. So as Jesus tells them, well, now I'm looking for it. He says in verse 12, do you know what I've done to you? If it was about foot washing, the conversation would have ended there, but it wasn't about foot washing. And Jesus tells them that as as they progress in their faith, as they learn more significantly about what he has done for them, that it would all become clear later. And so I think even those 11 remaining who reflect back on that night and think about Judas and his participation that evening, it becomes significant to them in the future, I'm sure, as well, that Jesus washed Judas's feet just like he washed theirs. So I wonder if that has any impact on them in their in what they do for people later on. I suspect it does. So the lesson that comes out of there as Jesus just speaks plainly to them and says, one of you is going to betray me, and then they're all questioning among themselves, who is it? And they don't understand who it's going to be. And Simon Peter even tells John, find out who it is, because we want to know what's going on here. And they ask for clarification on that. And even after Jesus gives them a specific statement that I'll dip the morsel and give it to him, and Jesus says that, and Judas leaves, they're still wondering, well, where's Judas going? Well, he just told them where he's going. He's going to betray him. But they still don't understand the full impact of what that means. So that's kind of where we left off. Judas has left the building, and Jesus told him to go and do it quickly. And so we're ready to pick up in verse 31 with the next part of the story. So verses 31 through 35, it looks like. So therefore, when he had gone out, Jesus said, that he is Judas there, when Judas had gone out, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him immediately. Little children, I am with you a little while longer. You will seek me, and as I said to the Jews, now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
So this new commandment, the not so new commandment, if you will, comes immediately after the betrayer is left. The last of the 11 men who are left with Jesus at this intimate setting, this supper that he is having with just those closest to him. As soon as Judas leaves, the first topic that Jesus wants to talk about is glory. Jesus says, he's saying that the Son of Man is glorified. God is glorified in him. If God is glorified, God will glorify. And so there's lots of glory going on in here. That Jesus has been glorifying God through the way that he is living. Through his very existence, he is glorifying God. And God is being glorified in him. And I think this continual statement, this will glorify, and glorify him immediately, is talking about the things that are going to come about because of the cross, but also through the resurrection. The ultimate glory that God can have is being righteous and just and still forgiving sin. But the one command that he gives, the very next topic, the thing that he thinks is the most important thing for those 11 men that are left, he says, a little while I'm with you, you will seek me. Just as I said to the Jews, now I say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. Now this is going to be, leading into chapter 14, a cause of much distress. They've been following Jesus for 3 years. They've given everything for Jesus. And in their mind, at different times, even the conversation they've had coming into the night has been, who's the greatest? Who's going to be at your right hand? And when you come in your power, when your kingdom, your earthly kingdom, when you come and you just bring the peace on earth, bring that wonderful, glorious kingdom, when we get our righteous and mighty places next to you, when is that going to come? And who's going to be the best in that great, glorious kingdom that is coming? And so they have consistently and continuously struggled with the idea that Jesus is not going to become the earthly Messiah, the Messiah that comes with, kind of like the picture of the second coming, where he reigns eternally, where he sets up this wonderful, glorious kingdom. They think that's going to be what happens now. But what ends up happening is Jesus will die. And so part of this struggle is Jesus is dealing with their own pride, and he washes their feet at the very beginning of this. And I think that is something that really shows the contrast there. Jesus wasn't necessarily just washing feet. The Son of God was not washing man's feet. The ruler of creation, the one who has all things in his hands, are washing the feet of sinful, prideful men who would not stoop so low as to do that for someone else. And so the next thing that Jesus wants to say is, he starts off with, where I'm going, you cannot come. He is going to die, and they cannot follow him. Essentially what he's saying is, this following you've been doing for 3 years is going to stop, is going to end. You're not going to be able to follow me where I am going, which is going to be very concerning. And they'll even ask in chapter 14, what is the way? How can we get to where you're going? And again, Jesus answering the deeper spiritual truth of how we can get to the Father will say, I'm the way to the Father. But what he's just broke the news to them that this is going to be some of the last time that we get to be together. And that's important rolling into chapter 14. But verse 34 says, a new commandment I give to you. Now, Jason, is that you love one another, is that a new commandment?
It is not. Leviticus, I think is it 1819 or 1918? I never can remember. But in Leviticus, either 1819 or 1918, that's the command that you love your neighbor as yourself. And so it's been part of the law from all the way back at Moses' time. So it is not a new commandment.
It is not new to love one another, but it is new. The only spot that I can find that is necessarily new, that is any different than anything is before, it says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. In the Old Testament, there's this love people. That's an imperative. It is love someone else. But Jesus says, now there's an object lesson. Now there is a person to point to and say, listen, I know I'm supposed to love, but how do I do that? And Jesus says, that's me. That's what I just did. That's if you've been paying attention for the last 20 minutes of me washing your feet, this is me loving as I love you. You are to do this for other people. Just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. One of the things that I think is interesting is Jesus says love one another. Jesus says love as I have loved in the midst of Judas going to betray him. And this foretelling, the end of this chapter is the foretelling that Peter is going to deny and betray Jesus. And so in between all of this new commandment gets maybe a little, the setting and the scene kind of comes into shape of love people like Jesus, who was just washing feet, who was just washing feet of the very men who are going to turn their back on him, the very men who are going to be scattered, the very men who are not going to be with him in his hour of deepest need. Jesus, even when he is sorrowful. It says it many different times that he is just overwhelmed. Verse 21, Jesus was troubled in his spirit. Even in his trouble, he still has time to take time for our trouble. Even in this midst of this time, Jesus is going to talk to his disciples, reassure them, and still continue to teach and love them through it. But he says, again, a new commandment I love, and that we love like Jesus. Verse 25, by what? What is the this here?
By the way that you love one another.
By the way you love one another. And yes, I think it's important to point out that this loving one another is universal. It expands outside the church. But he's specifically talking to the love that you share for those in the kingdom, for those amongst yourselves. How we treat each other is what's going to show the world that we belong to Jesus. And so when we are interacting with one another in the body of Christ, are we acting out of love? Are we being so evidently loving that people on the outside can say, wow, the way that you handle your relationships, your conflicts between one another, that really shows that you love each other. I think sometimes in the church we can be more opinionated and maybe not backstabbing, but less loving and less focused on that and more focused on other things. But Jesus says this love is how people will know you belong to him. So my question is, does the world know you are of Jesus? And it's mostly rhetorical. But the idea here is, and I think it's important to kind of balance and measure all of these things. Jesus will say in the Sermon on the Mount many different times, do not be like the Pharisees. This love, we're not trying to love people so that we can say, wow, they just are so loving and it's so wonderful and amazing. We're not doing it so that other people can gawk at how wonderful we are. But, and that's something that I kind of wrestle with is if the world can't see it, how can they say, oh, you're loving? And so on one hand, people will say, well, I don't want to be overly loving and do it because I want the attention of people. Well, I love someone so much that I would go so far. Well, that's going to draw attention from people. And obviously we shouldn't seek the attention of men, rather the attention of God. But the principle still stands. Our love should be so evident. Our love should be so permeating that the world can see it. People can understand and see that you're a Christian because of the way you love people. And again, it's not for show. It's not for an outward, I'm gonna do all this for accolades, but this is who I am. This is who I want to be. This is the person that Jesus Christ is moving me to be through his Spirit.
Yeah. So I think, let me see if I can make a connection, because sometimes I see connections that I think are there and they seem to be super clear to me, but then I don't know if I can explain them right. So the more we've studied love this last year, we've been studying this on Sunday mornings for a full year now, kind of the more connections I see to the way things intertwine with one another regarding that subject. So Jesus says there in verse 31, he says, now is the Son of Man glorified. Well, he's God. He has glory, and we talked about this in a recent lesson on Sunday mornings. He exudes glory. He is glory, but he came as man, and man doesn't necessarily exude glory. So in his appearance as a man, he had to demonstrate glory by the way that he acted and by the things that he did. So now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. So what you were just saying was that we do these things not to heap recognition to ourselves, but who are we seeking to glorify by living the way that we live? We're seeking to glorify God. And so if I live the way God calls me to live, that glorifies him. And I don't do that to receive accolades or to receive praise. I do that to show that God's way is the best way to do things. And that's what Jesus did every step of the way. Every moment of his existence on this earth, he did what his Father wanted him to do, and in so doing, he glorified his Father. And so when Jesus was washing the disciples' feet, it was unexpected, it was shocking, it made them all very uncomfortable, to the point that Peter said, you can't do this. This is not appropriate, it's not proper. But Jesus said, I have to do it, because he had to do it, because that's what would honor his Father. It would glorify God if he did that. And so when he says, by this all men will know you're my disciples if you have love for one another, sometimes we look at that and we think, well, yeah, I'm going to love everybody so much, but they look at me and say, wow, he's a loving guy. But no, that's not what we're doing. We are loving people so that they can see the glory of God, so that they can honor and glorify Christ. And that, that's the reason he calls us to that, and that's the reason he loved the way he did, and he demonstrated these things, was to honor the Father. And how do we best honor our Father? We best honor the Father by loving other people. That's what Jesus did. He honored the Father by loving other people. And so, do what Jesus did. Love people. Maybe. Is it there?
Yeah.
If there are no objections,
Amen.
the motion passes. All right. So, anything to add to that section? This to me, if out of chapter 13, verses 34 and 35 are kind of the apex of the chapter here. We'll kind of see this theme roll around again. I mean, we'll see it again in 14, we'll see it again in 15, we'll see it again in 17. I assume it's in 16, I can't remember. But we just see this returning theme of loving people all through this final discourse that Jesus has with his disciples.
I find it kind of interesting that Simon Peter, Jesus goes on to make a real point about love, and love as I've loved you. And Simon just glosses over it, goes back to say, what do you mean that I can't follow you where you're going?
Yeah.
He goes back to the thought before that. He's not listening to what Jesus had to say, but Jesus responds to him, but then he does his Peter thing.
Yeah, that is so Peter.
Yeah.
bring us back down to earth, Peter. Okay, so our final section here, verses 36 through 38. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered, where I go, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you. Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times.
So, similar kind of circumstances, if you will, that Peter is not, as Judas is going to specifically sell Jesus his location and all the things that happen with Judas's betrayal. But this is, Peter's denial, is in essence a betraying of Jesus. It is a turning away, turning around. And I think that him denying is just as significant, if you will, as Judas's complete handing him over. And I think where my thoughts are on this is with the next question here of what's the difference is that Judas and Peter, they both at some time turn their back on Jesus. They turn their back on Jesus for their own gain. Judas was for silver. Peter was for self-preservation or what have you at that time when they are searching for his followers. He turns his back on Jesus for his own sake. And so both men are going to commit great acts of betrayal toward Jesus and his name. And so, but what is the difference between Peter and Judas?
Peter comes back.
Peter comes back. And I think that, the difference to me was Judas decides that I have no place with Jesus. That there is no way that I can ever be forgiven. There's no hope left for me. And I'm not, and again, it didn't happen, but I think that even in the midst of Jesus' love, he could have offered forgiveness. But Judas decided he had no hope.
I was listening to something on the way here about parenting, and this expert in parenting had kind of blown it with one of her kids, gotten angry and shouted, and so she was kind of walking through, how she's going to deal with that. But the bottom line she came back to when people asked her about parenting, what do I need to get good at? She said, well, the answer is always the same. You need to get good at repair, because we're all going to blow it. And I thought that's a really good principle. We need to think about that in the church. We need to think about that as Christians. We're all going to blow it. There's going to be a time where we have to make things right. And so getting good at repair. And Jesus helped Peter get, and that's what a parent does for a child. That's what we do for each other, is help each other repair. But we have to be ready to do it ourselves too. We have to own what we've done wrong and make it right.
I think that's beautiful. It's making me think of 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Verse 17, therefore if any man is in Christ, he is a new creature. The old things have passed away. Behold, the new things have come. Now all these things are from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. Namely, that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them. And he has committed to us the word of reconciliation. So, it's repair, it's reconciliation. It's putting things back together after they've been ruined by sin. And Christ, that idea of a ministry of reconciliation. A couple weeks ago in this, keep going back to sermons I preached recently, but it was, back in chapter 3, it's the ministry of the Spirit it's the ministry of the covenant. It's the ministry of a new covenant, the ministry of righteousness, the ministry of the Spirit. And then in chapter 4, verse 1, he says we have this ministry. It's the same ministry. So the ministry of reconciliation is in chapter 5 is a continuation of that theme of how we serve those who are outside of Christ. And so we reconcile, we repair. I like that. I like that a lot.
Hey, Jason.
You might hear another sermon on that. Yeah.
In my mind, I've always felt the difference for me between Judas and Peter and their betrayals was, to me, Judas that's about as low on the scale as you can get to throw somebody over for money. Peter was faced with fear.
Yeah.
Fear can do a lot of things to you in
Yeah.
a moment, and then you reflect on it and say, what did I do?
Yeah.
Where Judas was just premeditated.
Yeah. Yeah. Judas was calculating. Peter was reacting. Judas was acting and Peter was reacting, maybe. And so that, there's one of those things that, it's easy for us to, Monday morning quarterback and say, well, I wouldn't have done that if I was Peter. Oh, yes, you would have. How many of us have done it in the moment when it was, we had the moment to choose between right and wrong and it sprang upon us? How many of us have chosen wrong? We did the exact same thing Peter did. And hopefully we've come back like Peter did. So, yeah. Good. Does that sum up chapter 13? It kind of brings us to the end of 13. And we've got, since we always put some questions and things at the end of a chapter, so we'll see how much. We usually don't have time because we get to it right at the end of the class. But now we have time for some of our questions and things. I wonder how we'll answer them. We've never done this before. All right. So just something to think about. Do we learn more from Jesus' actions or attitude in John 13? And I know somebody's just going to say yes. Okay. Now that's a great answer. Now think about it. What is more revealing to us about who Jesus is? Is it the actions or the attitudes behind those actions that he's wanting us to mimic? If it was about foot washing, there'd have been a bowl back there at the back as you came in, and somebody would have been on foot washing duty tonight, and we would have had, Chuck would have a new line in his worship service thing where he has to have the foot washers ready to go every service. So the foot washing was a means to an end. It was a means to tell us about the attitude that he was trying to tell us about, and that attitude is love and how we love one another. And that can express itself in lots of different ways. But in that moment, Jesus did what love required. Love demanded that somebody humble themselves to provide the service that needed to be done, and no one had been willing to do that. So love demanded, and Jesus answered that call. And so the question then becomes for us, what does love demand from us? And it's going to vary from moment to moment, from day to day, but when you see that need that nobody else is willing to fulfill because nobody wants to humble themselves or nobody wants to step into that need, will you answer that call? That's what Jesus wants us to do.
I think if the attitude is present, the actions will follow.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the, as Justin has pointed out, what were the disciples talking about as they walked to the upper room? Who's the greatest among us? Well, obviously the greatest among them is not going to stoop down and wash the other's feet. And so if they even had that thought, like, there's nobody here to wash feet, I wonder if I should do it. Well, I can't do it. Otherwise I lose that argument that we were just having. I lose that position, and I can't claim it. And Jesus, the one who had not been involved in that discussion because he doesn't have anything to prove, he's the one that answers that call that love puts forth. So, yeah, Jesus wants us to have, and it makes me think of Philippians chapter 2, which says, have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus. And that's, that's what he demonstrates here. Philippians chapter 2, verse 5, have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking on the form of a bondservant, being made in likeness of men. So he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. So he was demonstrating an attitude through the actions. So yes, the actions were important, but only insofar as they revealed the attitude. And I think the same is true for us. We need to make sure that our actions, or we need to understand that our actions reveal our attitude, and make sure that our attitudes are what they should be. Okay, so for me, the final thoughts on chapter 13. Key words with John. You're always going to see a couple of recurring words. It seems like, and the word know is an important one there in chapter 13. It starts off at the very beginning of the chapter, Jesus knowing that his hour had come, that he was about to depart. So this whole series of events that begin to unfold in chapter 13 and go all the way through the garden, all the way through to the crucifixion, really, because all of these things take place in a single night. It's all predicated on this one thing, that Jesus knew the hour was here. And so everything that follows is a planned unfolding of those events. Everything that happens after that happens because Jesus knows his hour is here. So that word know, I think, we may not see it recur over and over and over again in this section, but everything is predicated on that word in this section. The word glory, it's kind of one of those things. The more we've studied through this topic of love, the more I've noticed the association of glory and love kind of finding them cohabitating, living together in one spot, married together probably would be a better way to say that in a church setting. But they're just right there together all the time, and I don't know if that's it's more evident to me in the book of John than in the other Gospels. Does that mean that Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't have a full story, or that they missed it? Well, their emphasis is different than John's. We know that each of the Gospel writers wrote with their particular frame of view or their particular emphasis that they wanted to bring forth. And so for John, we see this, this common theme of glory all through the book. It starts at the very beginning when Jesus, in chapter 1, we beheld his glory of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. And so from the very beginning, when John introduces Jesus, he introduces him with the theme of glory. And so everything that follows then is a demonstration of Jesus' glory and how he represents God's glory in the things that he does. So here, as we're coming to the kind of the apex of all the events, we're coming to the zenith of the story, we're going to see glory really being brought forth, because this is God's demonstration of his glory through Christ. And then, of course, love is going to be a word or a theme that follows through just over and over again in this section, as it does all through the book of John. John is the gospel writer that is known for demonstrating love. So, final thoughts: Jesus was willing to do what love required. He proved it by deed, and he called his disciples to follow his example, not specifically to do what he did as far as washing feet, but to do what he did in demonstrating love to others. And so that question then that sticks with me after reading this chapter is, what does love require of us? What do I need to do because love requires it? All right.
My final thoughts, I guess, very quickly, was pick up the towel. Doesn't matter your station, doesn't matter how powerful you are, doesn't matter how much authority you have, no matter what role you're in. Not specifically, again, as Jason was saying, for foot washing, but to me, a towel is a symbol of service, a symbol of the janitor, a symbol of the person who has to clean things up. Go be the person that does the things that love requires, does the things that serve other people. Don't look out for and serve yourself. James will have a lot to say about selfish ambition. So empty yourself like Jesus and become a servant. Pick up the towel. If Jesus can look Judas in the eye and wash his feet, we can show love to those who we are in conflict with. I think that that's a very controversial statement, with our cultural background and with, there are ways where you can just fling this pendulum any way you want. Of anyone who's anywhere, we need to show love and only love. And then there's, we only need to show love to a certain number of people. And I guess a broader context to which I had thought about this is the conflict can reach to personal conflict. It can reach from familial conflict. And it can even really reach to national conflict. How can we show love to even the people that nationally, culturally, we're told to hate? Naturally, culturally, we're told that, okay, well, these are the bad guys. These guys are the enemy. And Jesus is saying, love everyone. And again, there's lots of underlying layers to that. But it is still something that we're called to do, is to love even those who are going to turn their back on us, betray us, and come back on us.
I'd like to think that after Jesus got through doing what he did and explaining what he did, I would like to think that every disciple there was, I should have thought of that.
Yeah.
I should have thought of that.
Well, I mean, that's a good point. I think a lot of times, and even as I've been, we spent this whole year talking about love and trying to demonstrate love and what that looks like and everything. And for me, it's the big picture. I feel like I've got a grasp on it. I'm not that I'm perfect with it or that I fully understand what love is or anything, but from an aerial view looking down, okay, I think I understand love. But now, tomorrow's Thursday, and I've got 120 students that I'm going to see in my room throughout the day, and all of them need to be loved, and some of them need it a lot more than others. So what does that look like in those moment-by-moment interactions? And that's where the disciples, I think, any one of them, if you had stopped them on the way into that upper room and said, do you feel like you're pretty good at loving people? Well, I think I do a pretty good job of that. I think Jesus has taught us a lot about that. And then they go into the room, and you're right. Every one of them is like, well, that should be me washing his feet. It shouldn't be him washing my feet. I should be me washing his. And every one of them acknowledged that, but none of them saw it in the moment. None of them, or at least if they saw it, they weren't willing to humble themselves to do it. And so what is that moment by moment, day by day? It's Tuesday morning, and I've come into contact with somebody that I've never met before. What does love require right now in this moment? And that's a harder question to answer. But we need to be practicing it. We need to be getting better at it. We need to be looking for that answer. I don't know how to answer that one, other than try to do it. Try to love.
Love like no other human being. Love like Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. Kevin.
Well, what's in this popped in my head is that, I think Justin mentioned it was, Jesus already knew. I mean, he's known it, but he knows what's coming, and it's imminent. It is going to happen now, and he still took the time to make this point to help them be better.
Yeah.
And I know, at least personalize this for a second. I mean, I know I get busy so many times. I don't have 120. I only have like 23. But that I have to deal with, and that just takes time for me to do it. And I get busy with my schedule and all these things I have to do, and I forget to take that time to go away from that schedule. So you know what, this young lady needs this from me, and that's going to take this, and this. And sometimes I'm not willing to do that. And I think that's the lesson that Jesus, he takes that time, even with all this stuff that's going on in his mind, and he knows what's coming, to say, I need to help them.
Yeah.
And that's a big challenge to try to act that way.
It is, and I appreciate you saying that. You know, Jesus was dealing with his own stuff, as is the common way to say it today. You know, back in 14 or chapter 12, verse 27, and just a day or two leading up to this, you know, my soul has become troubled. Jesus was dealing with his own emotions, his own difficulties, and it's, you know, but even in the midst of that, he demonstrated love to other people. And so, you know, that we all have our own stuff, we all have our own needs, and all have in some way a need for others to minister to us in love and to show love to us in a particular moment. But we need to take that and turn it right back around and minister to other people in love as well.
Well, if you had 24 hours left to live, what would you be doing with it? Washing feet?
It's not at the top of my list, but I hope that I would find a way to express love, and not just, you know, weep about what was, you know. You're right. I mean,
Skydiving, Rocky Mountain climbing. I mean,
no, I'm not into that. But you know, I think for a lot of it is, you know, that kind of that woe is me. That, you know, it's my heart would be troubled if I knew that I had 24 hours left to live, and that's all I got. You know, I'd have a lot of things that I wanted to pack into that, and you know, that's a hard question to answer. Thanks for asking it. Okay. Well, do we have time to start maybe
Sure.
the first
We'll
section?
read it.
Okay.
I mean,
First,
it's all the way to-
we'll kind of, oh, wow. Well, no.
we could read it. I
We
mean,
can read it? All right, so a preamble, a precursor, a preview, if you will, of John chapter 14, and we'll really see there Chuck's already starting towards the door. I don't love it when he does that. All right. Verses 1 through 15 is where we're headed first. So do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. My Father, stop right there for a second. We just got done talking about Jesus. How was Jesus' heart in this moment? You know,
21.
he
Jesus was troubled in
feeling
his
some
spirit.
trouble. Yeah, he was feeling some trouble.
Giving away all my points. Just keep reading.
So sorry, but he's telling them, you know, I'm troubled, but don't worry, you're going to be okay. Okay, so in my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How do we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you know him and have seen him. Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Jesus said to him, have I been so long with you, and yet you have not come to know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own initiative, but the Father abiding in me does his work. Believe in me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. Otherwise, believe because of the works themselves. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also, and greater works than these he will do, because I go to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, that will I do, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. If you love me, you will keep my commandments.
We got 5 minutes.
We got
I
5
can do the
minutes.
first. I can do the
Okay.
first point on there. All right. See, let your hearts not be troubled. In this section, there's quite a few different statements, and I kind of bottled it down to 6 that I wanted to highlight, and then we'll look at some other pieces of the text maybe next week. But there's 1 command, 2 declarations, and 3 promises. And we can, again, we'll hash out all the different ways this is happening. But verse 1, and I think it's all we're going to get to tonight. But do not let your hearts be troubled. Again, as we just talked about, Jesus' heart has been troubled. Jesus was troubled many different times. He was troubled at the tomb of Lazarus. He was troubled when Judas is going to betray him. And these are specific instances to John. There are other times. He was troubled, if you will. This isn't necessarily in spirit, but he was troubled when the house of God, and he talks about the house of God here in a different sense, but the house of God, at least at the beginning of his ministry and at the end, the house of God, the temple, was being used as a den of robbers, is what he would call it. And his heart, if you will, was troubled, and he was moved to anger. And so this statement is not any troubling of your spirit or of your heart is not good. It's not what Jesus wants. If you struggle, if you have negative thoughts or negative emotions, can you do that and still be a Christian? Of course. Jesus isn't saying don't ever do that. What I believe he is saying is this little 14, this big 14 in my Bible needs to kind of be erased, and it just needs to have a little dashy line, as this is a continuation of what he just said. He just said, I am going to a place and you cannot follow. And Peter is saying, but I want to go with you. I'm going to lay down my life. And Jesus says, well, you're going to deny me 3 times. But let not your hearts be troubled. Let not your hearts be troubled. You will be scattered, and I am going to die. Even amidst that, do not let your heart be troubled. So I guess going into some of my very quick notes, this command also comes with I had a fancy word for it, not ability, but that's what I'm going to go with, the ability to live up to that command. We have within ourselves an ability to not let our hearts be troubled. I think specifically applying that to this instance, he is talking about this idea that do not be troubled that I have to leave. And he will continue to reiterate that it's going to be even better for you when I leave, because I'm going to send a helper, and God is going to come with you. And at the end of this section, it says that you're going to do greater works than I, and we'll talk about that. There's a couple different layers to that. But Jesus is going to leave, and he is trying to reassure them that it's going to be okay even if I have to leave. Do not let your hearts be troubled and break apart when these things come to pass, because I am still God. And he says, here is and again, we've got 2 minutes left, but some of the ways that this is, at least for me, kind of explained with what he is saying here is, you believe in God, or again, the English word is the exact same, imperative or in the second plural. So you believe, or you should, must believe. It's an imperative or the other statement. So the ESV says, believe in God, believe in me also. There's a little footnote that says at the bottom of mine, or you believe in God. And I believe that is probably the best translation of this word. You believe in God, whom you've never seen. You believe in this God that you've never been able to see, you've never been able to experience exactly who he is, and you believe in that person. You believe in that guy. I am going to be taken away from you, and you're going to have to believe in me with the same fervor, even if I'm not with you. You believe in someone who's not there. Now, when I am not going to be here, you're going to have the same kind of belief that you have in God about me, because I am no longer going to be in your midst. Maybe that's as clear as mud, but I think that's one of the lead-ins to kind of help us understand. He's saying, don't let your hearts be troubled if I'm not with you. It's going to be even better because you're going to have the Spirit and you're going to have God working and moving through you. And that's what all of the Trinitarian language that Jesus is talking about, of the Father's in me and I'm in the Father and all of these different things. He's trying to show that I am God. Believe like you do in God, like you're going to have to believe in me the same way, because I am going to go away. No longer will I be here in the flesh. No longer will you have me here. But just as you believe in God, whom you have never seen or heard or touched, believe in me in the same manner. He's reassuring them that even if Jesus is no longer in their presence, even if they can no longer follow, and he says, I am the way, even if they can no longer literally follow in the footsteps of literal Jesus, they can follow in the spiritual footsteps of Jesus and still follow the way, even if he's not there. So
that's a good start on chapter 14. I like it. We will revisit that next week.